I'm a dad. I've got 3 kids, a daughter and 2 sons. I want to talk about what is plainly a crisis that's, I don't know, been manufactured for masculinity. Everywhere you look in the news at the moment, from Southport to Southend, we see images of men, some of them older, some of them younger, but all of them apparently lost in the maelstrom of it all. Whether you look at education, employment, or addiction rates, or suicide attempts, it's not a pretty picture. Certainly not for men, especially, also undeniable, white working class young men. So what can be done about turning boys into traditional men of old? I'm joined now by author and educator Mike Fairclough. Mike resigned from his head teaching post in East Sussex last year, saying he'd been discriminated against, harassed and bullied for his unorthodox approach to education. It's great to see you, Mike.
Good to see you too, Neil.
This is a challenge for all of us, I think. Parents, teachers, society at large. Now, I think you've got a thesis about there being a deliberate, controlled demolition of society that's been going on account of wider behaviour and the curriculums in our schools. I wonder if you could develop that thesis for us.
Yeah, absolutely. I've been an educator in primary schools for 30 years. And over the 3 decades, I've seen a kind of steady decline in several things. One, in the sort of quality of teachers coming into the profession. So the intellectual bar has been lowered considerably. And there's also been the introduction of ideologies such as the gender ideology and a real massive kind of emphasis as well on mental health, but in a way which exaggerates and emphasizes people's weaknesses. So, for example, there seems to be this huge fear and demonization of anxiety. Now, anxiety is something that children and adults feel every single day about something. It's just a natural way that we live. But the idea is that if you kind of, within the education sector, the more that it's looked at, there's this idea that it's somehow going to go away, and it simply doesn't. So my educational philosophy, and I was a head teacher for 20 years, and throughout that time, it was on a state-funded school in Eastbourne called Westrise Junior School, and I ran a farm, 120-acre farm as well, alongside the usual curriculum. Taught the children to shoot 410 shotguns, air rifles. Some of them would skin rabbits, pluck pigeons. Every single child would learn to light a fire and cook over an open fire.
It sounded brilliant, Mike. It sounded brilliant. Yep. Every time I read about your school, it sounded more like a summer holiday than a school. I loved the thought of it. Yeah,
but what happened was COVID was I think we were making great progress actually, by the way, and we were at top of the league tables in many areas of the curriculum, etc., and had wide praise as well from the Guardian to the Telegraph to the Times, whatever. I could literally do anything actually, but during the pandemic and school closures, this sort of woke ideology was ramped up massively, and I've not seen a return to where we were going since that time. So, for example, character education, which is where my expertise is. So this is the building of resilience and getting children to move beyond their comfort zones in order to get stronger and to find the inner resources they need in order to tackle any of life's challenges. There seems to have been this sort of that's been set back massively from school closures, but then this sort of entrenching of woke ideology. So, I mean, a massive part of that, of course, is the lack of any sort of role models, which I think are inspiring, particularly to boys. So I draw on the mythological hero's crest. So, for example, Odysseus and any of those kind of great Greek myths, or some heroes from history or who are alive today, such as Julian Assange or Edward Snowden, or back in history to have Dr. Martin Luther King, etc. Men who inspire empowerment. And I feel like what children and young people are being offered at the moment are not empowered, inspiring people. They are generally weak and confused, and the whole thing just creates more of the same. So confused and weak children. And what your guest earlier was talking about, the kind of back in the day sort of World War II sort of heroes. And I'm fortunate because my paternal father, so my dad's dad, fought in the Somme, the Battle of the Somme in World War I, with the Cameron Highlanders. So I grew up with stories of resilience and bravery and freedom fighting. My headmaster at school was a World War II veteran. He fought in North Africa in World War II. And, I had all of these wonderful, resilient men around me sharing stories which inspired the same thing in me, which is why I think I was the only head teacher or school principal out of 43,500 in the entire United Kingdom to publicly question the COVID vaccine rollout to children. And this isn't, I'm not going off topic here, but the fact that I know other head teachers, men, who shared my concerns but publicly didn't share them shows how far we've fallen as a society when men can't stand up for their communities, and that's what we need to get back to.
Hang on, Mike, I'm just going to involve Jasmine here in the studio. Jasmine, do you agree with that thesis? And furthermore, do you agree that boys, I think, in particular, seem to be being ill-served? Yes, and it does seem to be deliberate. I mean, we're seeing a feminisation of society in a wrong way. I speak as a female. There's a weird sort of feminisation, the transgender element. We're telling boys that being masculine is toxic. Whatever you do, it's toxic. We're not, as you said, we're not giving them proper role models. This sense, these good qualities like bravery, standing for principle, morality. And if these other head teachers had those elements and were themselves trying to live them, loads of them would have spoken out and we would have had a very different situation. It would have been so different if any one collective group, like, for example, the teachers, had all come forward and said, not in my school, then the narrative, the flow of that narrative could have changed considerably. I'm up against a break, but Mike Fairclough's going to stay with us. We're going to pick this conversation up, develop it, but I have to go into a break. I'll also be joined by YouTuber and author Cameron McGregor. We'll be continuing the discussion. His channel, Finance, Freedom and Neo-Masculinity, is about embracing